Welcome to the session of the Women Who Wouldn't Wheesht, available on all good bookstores. Today, we want it to be quite an interactive session, so I'm going to introduce the panel, maybe ask them about what their favourite bit of the book is, and then really we're going to go out to the floor and actually try to get some engagement with yourselves, any questions you'd like to ask about what's happening in the craziness in Scotland. And so without any further field, my name is Marion Calder. I'm director and co-founder for Women Scotland. We were founded about 6 years ago to campaign against self-ID in Scotland, and we were successful. Woo! So I like to think that we're a thorn in the SNP's side, and sorry, Joanna.
Fine by me.
Right, the Women Who Wouldn't Wheesht is a collection of individuals' lived experience, as they like to say, of 30-odd women, all in Scotland. And it was being written up to the 5 years until Nicola Sturgeon resigned. So it's a really good kind of history about what has been going on up in Scotland, and from women whose views were not considered valid by the former First Minister. Well, yeah, they are. So we managed to get rid of her, and then then we got rid of Humza. Currently working on number 3. So we'll see how that goes. So the reason why I'm speaking today is you'll see that there's Susan Dalgetty and Lucy Hunter Blackburn. They were our very good friends at work, and one's a journalist, the other one works for Murray Blackburn Mackenzie, and they came up with the idea just over a year and a half ago. Well, this was published very quickly, and God bless all the women, some of them in the room today, that had to write their several hundred words to get it published. Right, so moving on, I'd like to introduce my panel. To my left-hand side, I have Joanna Cherry KC. Joanna has recently announced a return to the bar.
Both bars.
Both bars, and we're looking to keep her busy, which, trust me, that by the looks of the cases that are coming forward. She also sat on the Joint Committee on Human Rights. So thank you, Joanna. To her left-hand side is Susan Smith. She is my co-director, and she's also director of Byra's Place, which is the rape crisis centre that JK Rowling set up. And she's also a contributor to the Women Who Wouldn't Wheesht. And to my right-hand side, her wonderful display, is Miss Gillian Phillip. Gillian is a Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller, now turned Hollier, and she was the one that stated, "I stand with JK Rowling." She refuses to no longer lie to children, and she's also a contributor to the Women Who Wouldn't Wheesht. But to start off this afternoon's so I'd like to ask Joanna to start to kick us off.
Thanks. Well, hi, everyone. My chapter in the book deals with my experiences as an SNP member of the Westminster Parliament who stood up against my party leadership's embrace of gender identity ideology and Nicola Sturgeon's plans to introduce self-ID in Scotland. There was never any proper debate about this in the SNP, and I was disgusted by how many of my parliamentary colleagues and fellow party members failed to stand up to Sturgeon on it. And I was also pretty disgusted by the way in which the Scottish Green Party, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, and also even a few of the Conservative MSPs fell behind the push for self-ID. But I'm really proud of the grassroots movement that grew up in my country and stopped self-ID. And that's what the book chronicles. And as one of the other authors, my friend and former SNP activist Caroline McAllister says, it's really important because women's history is rarely recorded by those present, but this book does that. And but it also is important because it tells us a lot about how our politics is conducted nowadays, not just in Scotland, but also in the United Kingdom. I think the battle over gender identity ideology in Scotland typified two sides of the Scottish psyche. The first side, the one I prefer, is the free-thinking sons and daughters of the Enlightenment and the country which has produced lads and lassies au pairs. That means people from a humble background who were cultured and well-read and successful, a people a bit like my friend Alex Salmond, who died so suddenly and tragically at the weekend. The other side of the Scottish psyche is the parochial, douce, cowed Scots lacking in self-confidence and happy to farm out their thinking to the minister, and this is not sectarian, or to the priest, if like me you're a Catholic, or the self-styled chief mammy, Nicola Sturgeon. Now, because of my stand against self-ID, I lost my frontbench position in the SNP. I faced rape and death threats. I sued the Pink News for defamation, and I fought a desperate rearguard action against smears and attempts to have me expelled from the party. I haven't told the full story of that yet, but I look forward to doing so when I'm able to do so. And if it wasn't for Maya Forstater's case, I probably would have been expelled from the SNP. And what I really want to say today on a wider issue is what went wrong with the Gender Recognition Reform Bill in Scotland is a microcosm of everything that is going wrong with our politics. Ill thought through policies, the refusal to listen to people with legitimate concerns, the demonisation of dissenters, and the alienation of public opinion. So this book has much wider implications for how we conduct our public debate, and I really want to thank Susan and Lucy for putting it together.
I was at the session earlier this morning, and Professor Frank Frady was talking about referenda, not referendums, and specifically actually mentioned the recent Irish one with the idea that they were going to rephrase how they talk about family, and that was rejected. And he said that this gave an opportunity for people to be heard, and that probably if it hadn't, it would have gone through and everybody would have said that the people who opposed it were anti-progressive. And I think that struck home because it spoke of what was happening in Scotland with self-ID, that institutions, Parliament, civil service, all the sort of interest groups were thoroughly captured and believed that self-ID was the answer. And when we started out, there was very little opposition to all of this. And we were seen as bigots. We still are seen as bigots and evil and so on. But what we had to do was to build a movement really from scratch, that the people who should have been asking questions were refusing to do it. And it was a typical example of really, really bad policy that nearly made it into really, really bad law. And so we have 2 chapters of the book that I wrote, and one of them was about how we started in the face of these monumental odds and how we almost really didn't expect to be as successful as we did. We were amateurs, we were outsiders, we didn't have the entry that people like Engender and the established organisations in Scotland had. And it was very typical of what I would call a small country problems, that the levers of power are very easily captured. Our second chapter is about the law, because we'd taken the Scottish Government to court several times over the definition of sex in the Equality Act. And we won our first judicial review. So as per that, people can no longer claim that they are entitled to use services and spaces for the opposite sex on the basis of self-identity. So I think that was a really massive victory, even if some people haven't yet realised that that is the law. But our second case comes to the Supreme Court, just somewhere in this vicinity, it's very close, in November. And we are fighting to ensure that sex means biological sex, that it does not include people who have got a piece of paper. And so our second chapter really takes it up to the point where we were sitting listening to politicians in Parliament saying this piece of paper means nothing and it's just an admin change, and then they were going to court to say that this will allow men to enter women's spaces unfettered. So we need accountability and we need honesty from the people who are supposed to represent us, and I hope that's what we try to achieve.
Thank you, Susan.
Gillian. Thank you, Marion. Hi. I'm Gillian Phillip. I was fired from my writing job in 2020. It was it was a very abrupt firing. I have told this story before, and it still kind of even shocks me. I'd been tweeting about a lot of things. I mean, since 2010, 2011, 2012, when I first joined Twitter, basically, as it was then. I had always been very opinionated. I was extremely mouthy. I was positively obnoxious. And I tweeted about all kinds of subjects. And a lot of them were political. Never had a complaint. Never had a complaint from my publisher. Never had a complaint from working partners who were my employers, the book packagers. Never had a complaint from my agent. So when about in 2017, I sort of cottoned on to what was happening to women's rights. I can't remember what my peak moment was, but I do remember Mariah McLachlan's court case when a man basically hit her at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, and in court she was ordered to refer to him as her. And that was definitely one of the moments that piqued me. But anyway, I tweeted after that going on for 3 years. My publishers knew my opinions. They knew that I was tweeting about it. Nothing really happened. I noticed a couple of people at the publishers unfollow me, but that's fine, you know. Then 25th of June 2020, I'd been kind of enraged by the treatment of Rachel Rooney, who's a children's author. Now, she'd written the most beautiful picture book called My Body Is Me, which was celebrating, like, your body is amazing. It's the only one you've got. Look after it, treat it with care. It was inclusive. It was diverse. It was a beautiful little book. And Rachel was hounded and driven out of the publishing industry by writers, by children's writers, a shameful little clique of them, some of them quite well known. And she was driven out by their bullying. So I thought, you know, I tweeted about that. A couple of weeks later, I added the hashtag I stand with JK Rowling to my Twitter account, and that was blood in the water. Everything was quiet for about 2 weeks, and then one morning, this is the 25th of June, I woke up, couple of hostile posts, I blocked, I deleted, they kept coming back, they kept coming back, they kept coming back, and it snowballed for 24 hours. Now, I was really good at my job. I was basically one of the Erin Hunter team who wrote Animal Fantasy for working partners, published by HarperCollins in the US. And I kind of, maybe I thought I'd be a little bit protected because I was really good at my job. No, 24 hours it took them. By 9 o'clock the next morning, which was 2 p.m. the next morning, which was 9 a.m. New York time, I was out. They didn't refer back to me. They didn't come and ask for my side. They simply said, like, you're out. We are going to take the word of teenage trans right activists, perverts, furries, misogynists, and all of them anonymous against someone who's been writing for us for 10 years. So that's the basis of my story, and that's how I ended up writing the chapter for the book.
Well, as there's only the four of us on the panel, I've actually asked them to think of another chapter of this, or there's a story within the book, which one speaks to them that's not their own. So if I can start again with yourself, Joanna?
Well, I suppose I've taken a theme which covers a couple of chapters, more than a couple, and it's really about the chapters about women's experiences dealing with the Scottish Parliament. The women who the committee refused to hear from, sex abuse survivors, the women who watched proceedings from the public gallery with horror and then were ejected wholesale because one woman had exclaimed in horror, the woman who was told that she couldn't wear her suffragette scarf in the Scottish Parliament despite the fact that the MSPs scrutinising, and I use the word loosely, the bill were festooned in rainbow lanyards. And this really concerns me because it's the Scottish Parliament's 25th anniversary this year. And, devolution had huge backing in Scotland. 75% of those who voted in the referendum in 1997 wanted to devolve Parliament. And we were told that this Parliament was going to be different and better than Westminster, and it was going to be a people's Parliament. And that really has not proven to be the case. And that's why I think this book is of much wider significance and speaks to a debate in Scotland which is starting to take place about reforms that are required to the Scottish Parliament. And I think one of the reforms I would really like to see in the Scottish Parliament is that the committee system should be reformed along the Westminster line. Not something you'll often hear from a Scottish nationalist, but just over a decade ago, the select committees were reformed at Westminster, so the chairs are elected by all backbenchers, and it's very competitive to get on to the committees. The chairs of the committees at Westminster are appointed by the government whips, and boy, does it show, with a few honourable exceptions. Thank you.
Susan?
So again, there are so many brilliant chapters, and obviously my panel have written brilliant chapters. I'd like to mention Jenny's chapter.
Jenny, can you stand up, please?
It's a shortened version of a wonderful essay she wrote for Dark Horse magazine, and it's about how she went from someone who had a reasonable degree of success, I think that's fair to say, within the poetry scene, and had inspired and helped lots of other young poets, and they turned on her absolutely viciously just because she objected to a man who was saying that he wanted to beat up women. And it feels like that encapsulates so much of what's gone wrong, that we're in this ridiculous scenario where women can't even talk about male violence if that man has decided to claim a special identity, and we become the evil bigots and the bullies. And what happened to Jenny was horrific, but it's so beautifully written as well. So
Gillian?
My selection is another particularly, I thought, beautifully written chapter. It's actually the foreword to the entire book, and it's by the woman. Her handle is witchcrit, and her @ on X is dis_critic. She is the woman who invented the phrase "Women Won't Wheesht," and she could not have known how far it was spread. I have now seen the word wheesht used by posters and social media people in New Zealand, in South Africa, in New Orleans. It's simply gone worldwide, and go her for doing that. But she has the most amazing, touching story, and it goes. I can't tell your real name because she is still anonymous, and she's one of the women who simply cannot declare herself publicly. And she has a disabled daughter, and her opposition to what was proposed in Scotland was born out of her concern for that daughter. I've met her daughter. They are both as amazing, wonderful people. Having found this out, she starts to tie ribbons, green, purple, and white ribbons. She's having invented this slogan. She absolutely lived it. She did not wheesht. And she's, where's the bit? She said, and every time I tied a ribbon, it was with this in mind. I am a mother, and I will allow no man to use my disabled daughter as his shield. And amen to that.